The iPad mini is one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had with iOS before. For those of you who don't know, I've never actually bought or owned an iPad mini before, and given the recent refresh and the fact that this has quite a powerful CPU, and we know that iPad mini refreshes are quite rare, given Apple has done nothing with the iPad mini for about 4 years. Knowing all those things, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this one out. Not sure yet if I'm gonna keep it, but regardless, I have a lot to say about it, so without further ado, let's begin. What's fascinating to me about the iPad mini is the idea of it combining a lot of traits from an iPhone's portability, but the versatility and the screen real estate that you can get with an iPad. I know there's a ton of people out there right now that are into the foldable trend because they like the idea of merging kind of your smartphone and your tablet into one product, but you gotta deal with that plastic screen, that crease down the middle, and the $2,000 price tag, let alone the notch. I get that this is not exactly what they're going for when people are thinking of a two-in-one, but honestly, this combines a lot of the positive traits between what the iPad has and what the iPhone has. I understand that this is not going to fit in most people's pockets, and it may not be as portable as a foldable phone that can turn into a TV remote-sized brick that you slip into your pocket, but this arguably can fit in some people's pockets. I've seen it brought up in the comment section often, and I've even seen it among some of my other friends who have bigger pockets in their pants. They legit actually can fit this in there, not, super comfortably, but they can slide it into their pocket if they want to. Obviously, not everyone can. This is highly dependent on what kind of pants you're wearing, but a lot of this experience feels more closer to that than an iPhone, and that's because the screen is not to the extent of a size of a 9.7-inch or higher iPad, where you get a virtual keyboard that's about the size of a regular keyboard, or just a little bit smaller. With the iPad mini, as I've been using it for the past 24 hours or so, I've noticed that you almost have to type everything with your thumbs, more like a smartphone, but I don't really see this as a disadvantage because of the iPad mini's compact form factor. Typing with it in landscape with your thumbs or portrait mode with your thumbs feels perfectly adequate. You don't feel squished together. You don't feel like you're running out of space because, once again, the typing experience is closer to an iPhone than it is a laptop or a full-size iPad. I'm coming from one of the biggest iPads you can get, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which I use a lot, and I love that product, and I love how iOS can have more room to breathe, essentially, on that 4:3 aspect ratio, as well as just the physically larger screen. Split screen to me is far more practical, as is picture-in-picture. I know there's a ton of people out there that want that brought to iPhones, but in my opinion, iPhone's aspect ratios are far too tall, and even the largest iPhone, the iPhone XS Max, you couldn't really adequately pack multiple apps on that display screen with picture-in-picture and be doing it effectively or efficiently. I get it that that's been an option on Android or on Samsung phones for a while. I'm putting my foot down and saying, I've tried it, I don't find it too practical. I don't use the split screen on Android phones whenever I test them, because whenever I do, anytime the keyboard pops up, it covers up the other app. For me, it makes more sense that you would use one app at a time, and I do appreciate the iPhone X gestures because you can just swipe between apps very quickly. You don't need to have two on the screen simultaneously, whereas this, in my opinion, is as small as a screen can get and still comfortably support those split screen features. I can still easily put Discord and Twitter or messages and email both on the screen at the same time, and when I bring up the keyboard, it doesn't cover up the other application I was using. I can still comfortably have the keyboard pop up and still be reading text on both sides of the app, and I think that's mostly because of the more square aspect ratio you get on the iPad mini. But as I've talked about before, I've never had an iPad in this form factor, in this size, which is incredibly comfortable to hold even in just one hand if you want to use the Apple Pencil with the other hand, which this does support, or you just don't want something necessarily that you need to carry around a big briefcase for. This can be thrown around in legit like a binder. It's almost scary and bizarre how insanely light this device is, but yeah. I also think it's worth mentioning that anytime you try to type on this keyboard like you would a normal one, for me at least, because of my big hands, the screen is just impractical for that. It is not meant for people who want to type like they do on a laptop. That's something I'm always used to having on my iPads, because my last two have been the 10.5-inch iPad Pro, and then more recently the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. So I'm always used to having that big virtual keyboard that I can type very quickly on, whereas this is going back to having an iPhone keyboard, again, typing with the thumbs, but as I mentioned, it's comfortable, and also the performance on this has been insane. Maybe there's some type of placebo placebo effect that's making me feel like the screen has more in character with an iPhone screen because the pixel per inch is insanely high on this thing. For an iPad, that is. I get for a smartphone, 326 pixels per inch is pretty low, and most people would say kind of bad, like the iPhone XR. That has a 326 pixels per inch. I personally think that's fine. That display density is adequate enough for me for an average viewing distance, and with a screen this large, at almost 8 inches, having that same screen density makes the display look incredibly rich, and it is worth mentioning this is the highest pixel density you can get on an iPad. Those iPad Pros, they're much bigger screens, but the pixels are much more spread out, which at an average viewing distance doesn't really make that much of a difference, but I'm just so amazed to see a device that's this compact, but still popping so much detail within the display. The A12 chip, I can completely see the performance in, especially in games like Fortnite, one of the most popular games people are playing right now. I opened it on the iPad mini and was shocked to see how good the FPS and the detail was on a device this compact and this small. It got a little hot, but definitely not Pixel 3 levels of heat, and I played it for a good hour, and I found it surprisingly comfortable. The fact that it's not a giant screen like on the other iPad Pros where the HUD and the controls of the game are kind of too spread out and you kind of have to play thumb war with the device just to reach all the different controls. This is so compact that reaching all the different controls is very ergonomic and simple, but you still have that A12 power that allows you to play at full resolution, graphic settings on high, 60 frames a second, and probably because the screen's so tiny, you can't really tell when things in the background aren't loading very well. So quite frankly, it just runs amazingly, which to me is quite impressive given this product is 64 gigs standard and starts at $399, which, as many other review sites out there have mentioned, there's basically no competition here. If you're in the field of wanting a small, compact, and light tablet, but you want it to still be powerful, the iPad mini 5 has essentially nothing to compare to. There's no other tablet out there right now that has the versatility and the app support that the iPad mini has. All of those amazing apps we've talked about on our iPad Pros, like LumaFusion and Over and Affinity Photo, that allow you to do really, really in-depth video editing or insane picture editing that can rival that of Adobe Photoshop on a desktop computer. All those apps are still available here. Granted, they're very small, so if you're using this for, work and stuff, it's going to be quite a tiny screen you're working on, so I doubt many people are going to use this for video editing, but if you got small hands and you're okay with this size, you have the option to. That possibility that you had with the iPad Pros is all there, just in a slightly more uncomfortable way, because you have to use that Apple Pencil 1, and there's no Face ID, and you still have a physical home button that clicks, like the iPhone 6S. Yeah, there's a lot of dated technology in here that I'm not crazy about, but quite frankly, to sum it up, you cannot get a tablet experience this compact, this powerful, and this affordable to the point that iPad mini is basically slaying any other tablet in its field. And personally, with my brief experience with it, I have to admit that I think the iPad mini form factor is incredibly underrated. I think this is a huge market for people who want to have something that isn't as bulky as a 10-inch iPad or a 13-inch iPad because they don't want to carry that big device around with them, but they still want all of the iOS advantages that the iPad offers. Split screen, picture-in-picture, being able to use the device in any orientation if you want to, being able to stuff as many apps as you want in that dock. Things that wouldn't really be practical on an iPhone, in my opinion. I know there's people out there that want split screen and picture-in-picture on the iPhone. I just think the screens are too small personally. So this is like the perfect middle ground. You can get all of those iPad advantages without having to compromise on the portability of an iPhone. Granted, this won't fit in most people's pockets, like I said, but a lot of people can store this quite easily in whatever bag they take with them, small or big. It weighs basically nothing. So personally, I hope the iPad mini does really well. If you're thinking about getting one, I highly recommend you go to an Apple store and try one out for yourself. You may realize how comfortable this thing is, even though you don't have that full-size keyboard, typing like you do on your smartphone, but having the advantages of an iPad in one package for only $400 starting price, but still getting an A12 chip, which is almost unmatched by the competition, still getting 64 gigs of storage, which for a lot of people will be plenty. I highly recommend you guys check this one out, because if we get enough people buying the iPad mini, Apple will hopefully see that this is a big market and could make the dream device that I'm imagining right now, a iPad that has this form factor, however, has all of the specs and the features that the new and improved iPad Pros do. I love those bezel-less designs. I love Face ID. I love that they're all in on gesture control. I love the Apple Pencil 2 charging method and how much more easy that is. I love charging via USB-C. I love those stereo speakers on both sides. That certainly will outweigh a lot of the cons the iPad mini has for a lot of people that I'm not a fan of. I'm not huge on Touch ID. I prefer Face ID. Not huge on the Apple Pencil 1. I would much rather have the boxy method with the Apple Pencil 2 docking on the side. I'd much rather have USB-C, the stereo speakers. There's plenty of advantages those iPad Pros still have over this. But if Apple could make a pro-oriented iPad in this form factor, maybe starting at $500, $600 even, that would be a killer device, I think, for a lot of people. Portability, but premium, while still getting a lot of those iPad advantages that you can't get really with an iPhone. That's the power of 4x3, and that's the versatility of iOS. So, to those of you out there who have purchased an iPad mini or are using an iPad mini right now, let me know what you think of it or what you think of the iPad mini's future down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.